After 30 years in the same company, I handed in my badge, shook the CEO's hand, and came home to surprise Lisa with plane tickets to Santorini. I'd even practiced what I'd say, something smooth and sentimental. A little cheesy, probably, but I thought she'd like that. We'd been through a lot together, or so I thought. The plan was simple: retire, celebrate, and see the world. No more deadlines, no more boardroom meetings. Just her and me, ocean breezes, and wine on balconies. But when I opened our retirement account to plan our getaway, it was empty. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. A digital glitch, maybe a security breach. My hands hovered over the keyboard, a sick feeling rising from somewhere deep in my gut. I refreshed the page. Still zero. I checked the statement history, and that's when the pattern jumped out: small, almost unnoticeable withdrawals, like someone siphoning gas out of a car a few drops at a time. The last transaction was just 3 days ago. I called the bank. The representative confirmed what I was afraid to hear. The transfers were authorized using the credentials tied to our joint account. Over the past 11 months, someone had been moving funds, little by little, into an external account. It wasn't until she read off the name on the other account that everything inside me turned to ice. Lisa. And a man named Trevor. That name meant nothing to me at the time. But it didn't stay that way for long. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one we bought together the year our daughter graduated college. Lisa had decorated it with a new vase just the week before. I stared at it, wondering if she'd picked it out on one of her girls' weekends that were, apparently, nothing of the sort. I couldn't even hear the sound of the fridge humming or the clock ticking anymore. Just a low, hollow buzz in my ears. 30 years. That's how long Lisa and I had been married. We'd met in college, me the quiet engineering student with calloused hands, her the artsy marketing major who brought color wherever she went. Or at least, that's how I used to think of her. We built a life. Raised a daughter. Bought a house and paid it off together. I trusted her with everything. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I didn't even know how to begin processing it. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink, and I started a spreadsheet. It sounds ridiculous now, but that's what made sense to me in the moment. I listed every transfer. Every account. I called the bank again, this time asking for copies of authorization logs. I asked for IP address histories. I knew my way around digital systems just enough to piece together a map. And the map pointed straight to betrayal. Trevor, Lisa's co-beneficiary, on the secret account, was a real estate broker about 15 years younger than us. I found his business website, his Instagram, his smug smile leaning on sports cars he probably didn't own. His posts were full of motivational quotes and pictures of tropical beaches. Places Lisa had always said she'd wanted to visit. They weren't just planning a trip. They were planning a life. I found a folder she'd hidden in a locked drawer in her art studio. Not locked well, mind you, just one of those cheap slide latches. Inside were printed statements for an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, a fake identity application form, and a post-it note with, May 11th, final flight, scribbled in her handwriting. I stood there in that room that used to smell like oil paints and cinnamon candles, now just stinking of lies. The pieces clicked together all too fast. The sudden obsession with downsizing. Her suggestion last winter that we should sell the house, lighten the load. The excuses about how the market was volatile and that maybe it was better to shift money around for better returns. It had all been one long, careful setup. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I wasn't ready to hear someone else put words to what I was still struggling to accept. That night, Lisa came home late. She laughed at something on her phone, kissed my cheek, and told me she was exhausted from volunteering. She smelled different, overly floral, like a cover-up, and I realized then I hadn't actually touched her in weeks. Not really. Not since she started working out more often. Always leaving the house with a full face of makeup, like she was heading to a date, not a gym. I watched her move through the kitchen like nothing had changed. That was the part that stung the most. The performance. The normalcy. The ease with which she'd lived beside me while quietly dismantling everything we'd built. She didn't know I knew. And I decided I'd keep it that way. At least for a while. That weekend, I called my sister Susan. She was the only person I trusted who'd know what to do, and more importantly, how to do it right. She was always the one who noticed things before the rest of us. Growing up, she was the one who knew Dad was sick before the diagnosis. The one who warned me, gently, when Lisa first started pulling away. Susan didn't say much over the phone. Just asked me to send her everything I had and promised she'd look into some things on her end. That was enough. In the days that followed, I kept playing the part. I took Lisa out to dinner. I asked her about her day. I smiled. Nodded. Pretended like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I started building a digital fortress, backing up files, recording timestamps, getting bank documents notarized. Lisa had spent 11 months taking my life apart piece by piece. I was going to spend the next few weeks making sure she paid for it, inch by inch. And when the day came, I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't even going to argue. No, when the truth came down, it would do so with precision. Legally. Quietly. But with a weight she'd never forget. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. And Lisa? She wasn't just a cheater. She was a criminal. The weeks that followed were a performance, hers full of deceit, mine laced with restraint. Lisa moved through our home like nothing was wrong. She kept up appearances, even doubled down on her role as the doting wife. She made my favorite pot roast one Sunday, humming an old song from the 80s like it still meant something. She lit the candles on the patio one night and told me we should start planning a road trip through the Rockies. Every word, every touch, was a layer of poison wrapped in sugar. I played along. What else could I do? I smiled, nodded, offered to pack the cooler. I asked her how her volunteer meetings were going and whether she was still seeing the same doctor about her shoulder. The same doctor she'd mentioned 5 or 6 times now, though I'd never seen a bill, a referral, or even a calendar reminder. She always brushed it off with vague descriptions. Just maintenance, she'd say. Nothing serious. The more she acted, the more transparent she became. There was something frantic about her niceness. Something overly polished, as if she were trying to rewrite the past before it caught up to her. But the truth was already out in the open, she just didn't know I'd seen it. It started one night when my tablet buzzed with a notification from our old cloud account. She must have forgotten it was still linked. She rarely touched tech without asking me for help, but somehow had managed to store dozens of files in a shared drive, one we hadn't used since our daughter was in high school. I opened it and found hundreds of photos. Most of them were of Lisa and Trevor. Beachside dinners, hotel balconies, wine glasses clinking beneath chandeliers. She'd captured them mid-laugh, hands on each other's knees, sometimes even in matching outfits. I stared at one where she wore the necklace I bought her for our 25th anniversary, wrapped around her neck while Trevor kissed her cheek. There were screenshots of flight itineraries, emails about property listings in Belize, a PDF labeled exit plan. That one hit hardest. Inside was a full breakdown of their timeline. When they'd start moving assets. How to funnel money without raising flags. When to tell the old man she was leaving. The language was cold. Surgical. I scrolled further. There were chat logs. Long threads of conversation between Lisa and Trevor, full of cheap flirtation and financial scheming. They mocked me. Called me a boring fossil, and too slow to catch on. Trevor joked about how easy it was to manipulate me, how she had me wrapped like a Christmas gift. Lisa responded with laughing emojis, talking about how she just had to keep up the act a little longer. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I just laid there in bed next to her, listening to her breathing, wondering how many nights she'd return from his arms straight into mine without missing a beat. I remembered all the times I'd made excuses for her, told myself maybe we were just going through a quiet phase. Marriage isn't supposed to be fireworks every year, right? But now I realized I'd been clinging to a version of her that hadn't existed in a long time. She had claimed, more than once, that she'd never been with anyone else. The last time she'd said it was in the middle of a conversation I barely remember now, something about trust, how people in our town were getting divorced left and right. I'd nodded along, grateful. Foolish. Now, knowing the truth, those words played on loop in my head. Not just a lie, but a cruel, practiced one. She kept up the act longer than I expected. For a moment, I even wondered if maybe she was second-guessing it all. Maybe guilt had crept in. But then came the twist. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, unprompted. She brought in fresh lemonade from the backyard and casually floated the idea of selling the house. Said we could just travel light now that we were older. That it was silly to hold on to so much space when it was just the two of us. Said she was craving simplicity. I nodded. Told her it wasn't a bad idea. But deep down, I knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to sell fast, liquidate assets, and vanish. The house was the last major piece. Once it was gone, she'd have nothing tethering her here. She was setting the final stage. What she didn't know was that I had already set mine. That same week, I called Susan again. My sister had always been the one with a head for details, the one who had studied contracts for fun when we were younger. She didn't react with anger or pity, just focus. She told me to stop talking on the phone and start communicating through a private app she used for sensitive legal correspondence. She walked me through collecting and preserving digital evidence, how to properly file data trails, and how to protect what remained of my identity and assets. But the most important call she made was to someone else entirely, an old law school friend who had become a federal investigator specializing in financial crimes. That's how Agent Grant entered the picture. I didn't speak with him directly at first, but Susan told me he was thorough. Calm. The kind of man who didn't move until everything was airtight. And that's exactly what I wanted. Lisa had been careful. Sneaky. But she was sloppy with time. She got used to my routines, assumed my silence meant ignorance. She didn't realize I was watching, documenting, building a case stronger than just betrayal. Strong enough to bring real consequences. Not just divorce. Not just anger. Federal. While Lisa scrolled through Zillow listings and left magazines open on pages with turquoise beaches, I was backing up files, cross-referencing timestamps, and feeding them into a digital archive Susan was organizing for Agent Grant's team. It was surreal, living this double life. One moment, I was helping Lisa pick out new kitchen tiles like we'd be here another 10 years. The next, I was copying her fake identity application and uploading it to a secure drive labeled Exhibit C. I watched her sleep while I read Trevor's emails to her on a second screen, emails she thought were private, promising her a yacht and freedom and champagne nights, once the old man signs the papers. She had underestimated me. Badly. And for the first time in weeks, that realization gave me something I hadn't felt since the moment I saw the empty account. Leverage. Lisa thought she was winning. But she didn't know I'd already placed the first call. And the next move wouldn't be mine. It would be the government's. There's a certain discipline that comes after devastation, a kind of focus only possible when there's nothing left to lose. That's where I found myself. Not angry. Not broken. Just clear. Coldly, painfully clear. Each evening, after Lisa went to bed, I opened the files. I logged bank transfers line by line, cross-referenced dates with the emails I had pulled from her cloud sync. I collected hotel receipts, Airbnb confirmations under aliases, even wire transfer details disguised as payments to a shell company that looked like a travel agency, except this agency had no website, no phone number, and didn't exist outside of a small P.O. box in Florida. Trevor and Lisa weren't just running off together. They were laundering stolen retirement funds, methodically and deliberately. She'd found someone slick enough to build the pipework, and gullible enough to think she loved him. The sum total of what they'd taken hovered just above $820,000. Susan helped organize the evidence. She was meticulous, color-coding emails and tagging the most damning documents. The receipts and transaction logs were enough to make anyone's stomach turn. Watching your future get dismantled, not by war or disease or market collapse, but by the woman you shared a bed with every night, that left a mark deeper than any scar. By the third week, the file was nearly 300 pages. I added printed screenshots from Lisa's shared drive, an itemized packing list, property documents in Belize, emails about converting assets to cryptocurrency. There were even photos of the villa they'd reserved, a beachfront house with an infinity pool, rented under Trevor's name. I delivered the final package to Agent Grant in person. He was everything Susan had described, soft-spoken, calm, not one to give much away. He flipped through the file slowly, expression unreadable. No reaction to the tropical escape plans. None when he saw the marriage certificate beside the stolen funds. Just quiet nods and the occasional note in the margin. He took it all. Said they'd reach out again when the timing was right. I didn't expect anything fast. Government moves slow. But sometimes the law doesn't need to rush, it just waits for you to walk into your own trap. That's when the idea struck. It came to me in the middle of a sleepless night, lying next to the woman who had spent nearly a year lying to me. I stared at the ceiling while she dreamed about beaches, unaware that the walls were closing in. I imagined her walking through an airport with a spring in her step, boarding a plane to her new life, completely unaware of what was waiting for her on the other side. It wouldn't be rage that unraveled her. It would be paperwork. Strategy. Cold, perfect timing. I booked a one-way, first-class ticket to the Bahamas in her name. I printed the boarding pass, sealed it in a new manila folder, and left it in the drawer where she kept her secret documents, just beside her fake ID application and the empty envelope from the Cayman Islands bank. The flight left in 36 hours. Enough time to panic, just not enough time to think clearly. The next step required subtlety. I used an encrypted email service, one that didn't trace back to me. The message was short, deliberate, and designed to sound exactly like Trevor. I copied the rhythm of his words from their old messages, made it sound familiar, warm, urgent. Attached was the boarding pass. Lisa found the email around noon. I watched her from the kitchen, pretending to be engrossed in the newspaper. She stood frozen in the living room, phone in hand, her expression a mixture of shock and exhilaration. Her lips parted just slightly, as if something had been confirmed. A promise kept. She didn't look back at me. Within the hour, she was moving through the house like a woman possessed. She tossed clothes into a duffel, checked her reflection twice, and opened the safe to retrieve the last of her jewelry. I watched her remove her wedding ring, not slowly, not with hesitation, but like it was a step on a checklist. She left it on the counter. That little circle of gold sat there for minutes before I picked it up. It felt heavier than I remembered. I turned it over and found the engraving I'd requested all those years ago. Until the end. I put it in a drawer. When Lisa stepped out the door, she didn't say goodbye. She had a pair of sunglasses perched on her head, hair freshly done, and a faint spray of perfume trailing behind her. She looked like someone going on vacation, not someone walking into the last chapter of a very short story. Lisa arrived at the airport the way you'd expect a woman to show up for the start of a new life, sunglasses too large for her face, rolling designer luggage that probably still had the price tag tucked inside, and an outfit she'd never worn around me. She looked like someone who belonged in a magazine spread about reinvention, elegant, composed, completely detached from the woman I thought I'd married. She didn't rush. She didn't fidget. She floated through the terminal with the ease of someone who believed she'd already won. Her makeup was flawless, her hair pulled back in the style she'd always said was too much work for daily life. I imagine she probably rehearsed the scene in her head a dozen times, boarding pass in one hand, a mimosa waiting on the plane, the ocean breeze just a few hours away. Check-in was uneventful. The airline staff smiled, scanned her passport, and handed her the boarding pass I'd booked. Her forged travel ID passed the first glance. Her luggage was tagged for priority handling. Everything looked seamless, just as I'd planned it. She made her way to the gate with that same practiced smile, probably thinking about Trevor, imagining him already poolside with a drink, waiting to welcome her into paradise. She never noticed the two plainclothes agents flanking the boarding lane. They didn't flash badges. Didn't raise their voices. One of them simply stepped in front of her as she reached to scan the pass, while the other took her arm, gently, professionally, and gestured toward a quieter area just past the seating zone. A few travelers turned to look, but no one made a scene. Lisa barely had time to react before she was being led away, her boarding pass still in her hand, her mouth slightly open in confusion. She probably thought it was a mistake at first. A paperwork error. Maybe something to do with the passport. But it wasn't until she saw the sealed envelope marked Department of Justice that her posture shifted. The sunglasses came off. Her mouth moved, but not fast enough to outrun the questions, or the evidence. She didn't even make it onto the plane. By the time she realized what was happening, the flight had boarded without her. Her designer bag, packed with her exit plan, was being sifted through in a private room nearby. The documents she thought she'd hidden, the digital breadcrumbs she never bothered to erase, they were all part of the case now. Meanwhile, across the country, Trevor was having a very different evening. He was picked up at a condo in Miami, halfway through ordering room service. He hadn't been careful, not that he was the careful type. His arrogance always outpaced his intelligence. It turns out, using stolen retirement funds to place bets through a flagged online casino wasn't just stupid, it was enough to land him under federal scrutiny. That's how Agent Grant and his team had found the final piece. The sting operation had already been in motion. My evidence had solidified their case. But what neither Lisa nor Trevor knew was that my anonymous email, meant to spook her into leaving early, lined up perfectly with a quiet green light from the bureau. The arrest at the airport wasn't just poetic. It was strategic. Lisa's sudden departure made her look like she was fleeing, which in legal terms, added a whole new layer of intent to the charges. Trevor, unaware she was en route, hadn't planned to leave yet. His schedule was looser, less thought out. He'd been biding time, still moving money between accounts, still thinking he had weeks before they needed to disappear for good. So when Lisa showed up out of nowhere, carrying documents that exposed their entire operation, the investigators had everything they needed to connect the dots. She led them right to the finish line. All wrapped up in a monogrammed duffel bag. What struck me most was the timing. Not just that it worked, but how perfect it was. There was something surgical about it. Precise. I hadn't planned it that way. Not exactly. The email I sent wasn't meant to trigger an arrest. I just wanted her gone before she made another move. I wanted her to panic, to show her hand. But instead, she walked straight into the trap. The arrest made the news, quietly, but noticeably. Local headlines ran small blurbs about a retired couple involved in a white-collar fraud investigation. Names weren't listed at first, but in our town, it didn't take long for whispers to become stories. Neighbors began to talk. Curious looks turned into cautious sympathy. The same people who had smiled at Lisa in the grocery store were now suddenly remembering how often she'd disappeared over the past year. And as for me, I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in the technical victory, not the kind most people expect. There was just a long, empty silence in the house after she was gone. The smell of her perfume still lingered in the bathroom. A few half-finished art pieces still leaned against the wall in her studio. One of them was a sketch of a sailboat, unfinished, like everything else she touched in those final months. But I had no intention of finishing it. Lisa and Trevor had built a fantasy on top of my reality, and in the end, that fantasy had collapsed under the weight of real-world consequences. They thought they were clever. Thought they could outmaneuver the system. But the law doesn't care how clever you are. The law cares about facts. And the facts were stacked high: evidence, transfers, deception, fraud. They had constructed a life with stolen bricks. The moment they tried to live in it, the whole thing caved in. I stood in the living room that night, the same room where she once told me we'd grow old together. I watched the sunset through the window, the light falling across the framed photo of our wedding day. I didn't cry. I didn't smile, either. I just stood there, thinking about all the quiet lies that led to this moment. There was still more to come: hearings, courtrooms, paperwork. But this part? This was done. She wanted a first-class escape. She got a first-class escort to a federal holding cell instead. Justice arrived not with a bang, but with a folder. A thick one. Neatly bound, its cover stamped with a federal seal that would haunt Lisa longer than any memory of me ever could. She was charged with federal financial fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The paper trail was clean, clinical, and damning. Everything she thought had been hidden in whispered emails and forgotten folders had been laid bare, dissected under the cold fluorescent lights of a federal investigation room. Every dollar she siphoned. Every lie she typed. Every plan she made behind my back. All of it catalogued, labeled, admissible. She was sentenced to 8 years. Trevor got 12. His arrogance was his downfall, in the end. He thought he could out-talk the law, the way he'd out-talked clients and probably half a dozen other women before Lisa. But it turned out that laundering stolen money through shell corporations and gambling platforms flagged for international crimes wasn't something you could walk away from with a fine and a speech. The feds had been watching him longer than we knew. Their downfall wasn't just poetic, it was thorough. The court ruled swiftly. The judge had seen enough betrayal in black and white to strip away any illusion of shared ownership. I was awarded full control over our estate, the house, the remaining assets, everything we had built together, and everything they tried to gut from underneath me. Restitution was ordered from any future liquidated funds tied to Lisa and Trevor's offshore holdings. It wasn't about the money, though. Not anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. And once the courtrooms were behind me, once the cameras stopped trailing after headlines about the quiet betrayal in the suburbs, I found myself surrounded by a new kind of silence. One not built on suspicion or lies. Real silence. Peaceful. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. The quiet of the house felt too big. Every room echoed. Her shoes were gone. Her perfume was gone. But the ghost of her, of what she'd done, lingered. Some nights I caught myself reaching for the second wine glass. Other times, I'd forget I didn't need to leave the light on in the hallway anymore. But day by day, I started putting things back together, not the old way, not pretending like it hadn't all collapsed, but building something honest from the ground up. I learned how to cook, not just microwave or grill, but real meals. I made a mess in the kitchen, burned garlic, ruined rice, but eventually found my rhythm. I started hiking again. Trails I hadn't touched in years, breathing in air that hadn't passed through a vent or across a courtroom. I picked up Hemingway again, the books I used to love before late meetings and distracted dinners took their place. I read slowly this time. Savoring. The house changed, too. I stripped the walls. Repainted. Removed anything she'd touched. I donated her art, boxed up the last traces of her studio. I replaced the furniture, not because I had to, but because I wanted every inch of the home to feel like mine. Honest space. No shadows hiding between the floorboards. What surprised me most was how quickly life started feeling full again, not with noise or people, but with clarity. I didn't chase closure. It came to me in pieces. In the silence between chapters of a novel. In the warmth of a pan just pulled from the oven. In the sound of gravel under my boots, miles away from any signal or screen. Lisa never reached out. Never wrote. I imagine she thought I'd be waiting, angry, bitter, obsessed. But I wasn't. I didn't follow her story through the prison system. I didn't track Trevor's plea deal, or whether they still spoke through lawyers. They were behind me, and they belonged there. Some men dream of revenge. They picture fireworks, shattered glass, fists through drywall. But I didn't want to destroy anything. I wanted the truth to land quietly, precisely, like a signature on a legal document. Final. Unarguable. I didn't want revenge that hurt. I wanted justice that spoke. And that's exactly what I got. Looking back now, I don't feel like I lost 40 years. I feel like I came out of a fog. Like I was living someone else's version of a life for too long, and finally stepped into my own. You can spend 30 years building a life and lose it in 30 seconds. But if you keep your mind clear, and your hands clean, you can build again. You can breathe again. You can wake up in a house that doesn't whisper someone else's name. I didn't burn it all down. I let the law do it for me, while she sat in first class, thinking she'd won. That was enough. That was everything.